So if you just stop for a second and, think about that simple act of putting on eyeliner or mascara.
Right, that quick flick of the wrist.
Exactly. Before you head out the door, you're actually taking part in a tradition that goes back, what, over 5 millennia?
It's absolutely true. I mean, the desire to enhance the eye is as old as civilization itself, but the conversation around safety and health has never been more complicated.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we take a whole stack of sources, scientific journals, market reports, and pull out the most important insights for you.
And today, our mission is laser-focused. We're going to unpack the world of ocular cosmetics. We're looking at the ancient roots, modern ingredients, societal drivers, and really the health implications of putting these things right next to the most sensitive part of your face.
And we should be specific. We're talking about the ocular surface. For you listening, when we say that, we mean a whole interconnected system. The cornea, eyelids, eyelashes, the tear film, all of it.
It's a very finely tuned environment, and that really gets us to our core question for today's deep dive.
Yes.
Are modern cosmetic products, with billions in R&D behind them, truly safer than the heavy metal mixtures of the ancient world? Or are we just trading one kind of risk for another?
Okay, let's unpack that history because it is just staggering how far back this goes. Our sources say the first recorded uses were in ancient Egypt around 5500 BCE.
Exactly. And it was never just about beauty. The Egyptians had two main pigments, a green one called uju and the famous black coal.
And while, sure, part of it was about allure, making the eyes look more expressive.
It was much more than that. It was practical and spiritual. They were imitating the gods, seeking divine protection, and on a public health level, they thought it helped.
They were multitasking on a divine level.
They really were. The makeup was meant to shield the eyes from the sun's glare, keep flies away, and they even believed it had antibacterial properties.
It's fascinating, but this is where it gets really interesting when you look at what was in it.
Yes, because that famous black coal often had huge amounts of heavy metals. We're talking lead sulfide galena or antimony sulfide.
Things we know now are acutely toxic.
Precisely. These are substances that are completely prohibited in places like the EU and Canada now. And it wasn't just a theoretical risk.
It had real-world consequences.
Oh, yes. Studies have confirmed that when they applied this lead-based coal to infants' eyelids, it directly led to a significant, measurable increase in their blood lead levels.
So that ancient beauty carried a major toxicity risk. That's a terrible trade-off.
It was. And that risk didn't go away. If you fast forward to Roman times, women were using extracts from a highly poisonous plant, Atropa belladonna,
What?
to dilate their pupils. It induced mydriasis, which was seen as a sign of beauty, and it could last for days.
And then everything just stopped. We hit the Middle Ages.
Yeah, it was a real dark time for cosmetics in Europe. For about 1,000 years, strict Christian dogma viewed changing your appearance as immoral, like altering God's work. It was a total rejection of artifice.
What a reversal. Okay, let's jump to the 20th century then, the big revolution. We shift from moral panic back to mass market products.
And thankfully, the initial focus was on avoiding those obvious dangers, like lead and sulfur. You had pioneers like Mabel Williams in the U.S. creating Lash Brown, which was basically petroleum jelly and oils.
And then Maybelline launches a mass market product in 1933, and the term mascara becomes mainstream.
It seems like a step in a safer direction, right? Simpler ingredients, but the danger was far from gone.
Tell me about Lash Lure.
So in the early 1930s, Lash Lure mascara comes out. But it wasn't just a colorant. It was a permanent dye. It contained a really powerful coal tar component, paraphenylenediamine.
And the result was immediate and tragic.
It was horrific. The chemical caused these severe, life-altering allergic reactions. The product was ultimately linked to one death and the complete loss of sight for a number of other people.
Wow.
That crisis, the widespread blindness and injury from Lash Lure, that was the catalyst. It's what finally pushed the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to start regulating mascara products.
That one story really frames where we are now, because we've gone from that kind of acute, visible crisis to this massive global industry.
Absolutely massive. The sources show the global eye makeup market was valued at $15.5 billion back in 2020.
And the projection?
It's projected to soar past $23 billion by 2028, with North America as the single biggest consumer.
The scale is just explosive. And the reasons people are using these products are evolving. You have the constants like anti-aging, but technology is a huge new driver.
You see it so clearly with the Zoom effect. everyone's suddenly spending hours a day in video calls, staring at their own face up close.
It makes you hyper aware of every little detail, especially around the eyes.
It does. And then you layer on social media with filters creating these totally unrealistic ideals. People are then driven to find products or even procedures that can try to mimic that digitally perfected look. It's an arms race against reality.
And it's not just a market for women anymore, is it?
Not at all. The men's personal care market is forecasted to hit over $275 billion by 2030. You see huge brands like Chanel launching male-specific lines like Boy Chanel. The audience is global and diversifying.
You mentioned something really interesting in the research about this concept of sparkle.
Yes, and this is where the health cycle can become really vicious. People want that bright, healthy sparkle in their eyes.
Which scientifically is not some magical quality.
No, that sparkle is just light reflecting off a healthy, smooth tear film. When someone gets an ocular surface disorder, like dry eye, that tear film breaks down, the sparkle diminishes.
So their eyes literally look different, duller.
And they chase that lost sparkle. They buy more cosmetics to try and offset the change, which, ironically, can often make the underlying health problem worse. It creates this vicious cycle.
Let's move to the hidden chemistry, because this is where the nuance really kicks in. We're past lead, but we're dealing with things we can't see. And the regulations globally are, well, they're not on the same page.
Not even close. Get this. The EU restricts or bans over 1,300 chemicals from cosmetics.
1,300, okay. And the USA?
11.
11. That massive gap needs some context. Why is it so different?
It's a different regulatory philosophy. The EU uses the precautionary principle. Basically, industry has to prove something is safe before it goes on the market.
Whereas the US is more reactive.
Exactly. The U.S. model often waits for evidence of harm or a huge public incident like lash lure before regulators step in.
Yeah.
So for most cosmetics, there's no pre-market safety approval required by the FDA except for color additives.
The responsibility lands almost entirely on you, the consumer.
Which is why we need to look at preservatives. They're necessary to prevent contamination, but they are a big problem for the ocular surface. Let's take benzalkonium chloride, or BAK.
The EU allows it up to a 0.1% concentration.
Right, but the lab data is alarming. Research shows that BAK concentrations hundreds of times below that legal limit killed human ocular surface cells in vitro.
Wow, so even at tiny doses, it's cytotoxic to those key cells.
Yes. And in the living eye, BAK is linked to chronic problems. Tear film instability, loss of essential goblet cells, and worsening dry eye disease.
Then you have parabens, used in thousands of U.S. products.
Same story. They're approved up to certain limits, but cell culture studies show serious damage at a fraction of that. For example, methylparaben, at a concentration 400 times less than the approved limit, significantly reduced the survival of human meibomian gland cells.
And the meibomian glands are critical. They make the oil for your tears.
They're essential. They produce the lipid layer that stops your tears from evaporating, damage them, and you're heading straight for dry eye symptoms. We see a link in humans, too. Higher urinary levels of these parabens are associated with more signs of dry eye.
What about something that seems harmless, like talc? It's just a bulking agent.
The problem with talc isn't the talc itself. It's the risk of asbestos contamination, which has repeatedly been found in modern cosmetics, even ones marketed to children. It's a serious risk.
Okay, what about tea tree oil? I see that marketed as a natural, helpful ingredient all the time.
And this is a perfect example of why context is everything in chemistry. In high concentrations, like a 50% lid scrub, its active component, T4O, is an effective clinical treatment for Demodex mite infestations.
So, high dose, short term for a specific medical problem.
Exactly. But the risk profile completely changes with chronic, low-dose cosmetic use in makeup removers or toners.
How so?
Studies in the lab showed that a mere 1% concentration of T4O killed all human meibomian gland cells within 90 minutes. It's also a known endocrine disruptor. So that daily low-dose exposure could lead to severe toxic problems over time.
The push for enhancement isn't just about chemicals, it's also mechanical. Even the simple eyelash curler from 1931 can cause things like nickel dermatitis.
And now we have much more intense procedures like lash lifts. That's basically a chemical perm for your eyelashes using thioglycolic acid.
And that changes the actual anatomy of the lash.
It does, which is a problem because the natural curl of your lashes helps regulate airflow over the eye. You change that, you can increase tear film evaporation, which leads to dry eye, which, as we said,
Thinks people seek out more cosmetics. The cycle continues. And all of these products can migrate, right?
yes, Mascara and eyeliner particles can literally move onto the ocular surface and physically block those vital meibomian glands.
And waterproof products make it worse.
They compound the risk. They're designed to be tough, so you need much more aggressive removers to get them off. And those removers bring their own chemical and mechanical risks to the table.
Okay, we have to do a deep dive on the eyelash growth serums. The prostaglandin analogs, or PGAs, these are everywhere now.
So a systematic review looked at the randomized controlled trials for PGAs. It found that using them was associated with about a 5-fold increased risk of conjunctival hyperemia.
In other words, persistent red eye.
Yes, compared to controls after about 4 to 6 months of use.
A 5-fold risk is a huge number, but I remember the sources said the certainty of that evidence was judged as very low because of bias in the studies. So how meaningful is that number?
That's the critical question. And while the studies themselves may be flawed, they're often industry-sponsored, not well-blinded. The adverse effects are very well documented in wider clinical practice. Even with flawed studies, the same serious side effects keep showing up.
So even if we can't trust the exact number, the harm itself is real. What are the worst side effects we should know about?
The most dramatic is probably puriorbitatopathy. This is a thinning of the eyelid skin and the fat around the orbit, which leads to noticeable volume loss.
So it can give you a sunken, hollowed-out look around your eyes.
Exactly. There's also intense itching, eyelid drooping, and even permanent changes to skin or iris color.
Permanent changes, just for longer lashes. I can see why some regulators have stepped in.
For sure. Sweden, for example, banned PTAs in over-the-counter cosmetics way back in 2013. It highlights that health officials recognize how serious these side effects can be. So what does this all boil down to? Our deep dive shows this pursuit of eye enhancement has a 5,000-year history. And while we've moved past, crude lead-based coal, the modern industry has these nuanced, often hidden risks in everyday ingredients that cause chronic damage, not acute poisoning.
It feels like the regulatory environment just hasn't caught up with the chemistry, or maybe the sheer force of consumer demand. For any professionals listening, you have to balance a patient's desires with their fundamental eye health.
And for you, the consumer, you're increasingly relying on influencers, on social media, not evidence-based medicine, often without knowing the long-term impact of the ingredients we've been talking about.
And that ties right into the power of marketing and perception. Get this for a final thought. A study compared a premium anti-wrinkle cream in a luxury jar against the exact same cream in a plain, neutral jar.
And scientifically, there was zero difference in effectiveness on wrinkles.
But the participants who got the luxury jar used significantly more of the product.
They perceived it differently. The packaging drove their behavior.
Exactly. The psychological perception drove physical consumption, completely separate from the actual clinical data.
So as we look at that $23 billion market, the provocative question for you is this. Will the future trend be towards scientifically defined clean products? Or will packaging and perception continue to define what quality means?
You should go explore what a term like hypoallergenic really means. You might be surprised to find out it's often not a regulated term at all. Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.
Always question the label.
We'll catch you next time.